What if the story of Cambodia's origins was built on a beautiful lie? For generations, we've been told one version, that the Khmer people emerged from the soil itself, that their bloodline, their brilliance, their empire was untouched, pure, indigenous. But in a dusty grave, beneath layers of forgotten time, a child was waiting, buried not with treasure, but with a secret that could change the story of Southeast Asia forever. He was no ruler, no warrior, just a boy, laid gently into the ground almost 2,000 years ago, during the earliest days of the Funan Kingdom, Cambodia's first empire. His bones were quiet, but his DNA was not. When scientists finally sequenced his genome in 2022, what they found cracked open a silence older than Angkor Wat. This child, born in the Mekong Delta, carried something no historian predicted: South Indian ancestry. Not a trace, not a whisper. Nearly half, 40 to 50% of his genome matched populations from across the Bay of Bengal, Tamil-speaking groups from southern India. This wasn't just cultural influence. This was blood. This was family. And here's the twist that hits harder than any headline. He's not an outsider. His DNA shows he's closer to modern Cambodians than to anyone else in Asia. So what are we really looking at here? A fluke burial? A lost love story? Or the genetic evidence that Indian migrants, not just ideas, helped shape the first Khmer kingdom? If this child was born of two worlds, was Funan built by two civilizations? And if his blood still runs through modern Cambodians, then who exactly are the children of Angkor? The grave gave us answers, and just enough mystery to ask something even bigger. Because the next question isn't just about one boy. It's about what kind of world he was born into, and what he might have inherited, not just in genes, but in power. It wasn't gold that rewrote Cambodia's past. It was a child. His bones were small, delicate, found in a quiet cemetery called Vat Komnou. No crown, no weapons, just silence and soil. The kind of burial you might walk past without a second glance. But this grave held a secret bigger than any temple. When researchers ran the radiocarbon test, the results landed like thunder: 78 to 234 C. That's the time of Funan, the very beginning of Cambodia's first known kingdom. Funan, the name spoken in textbooks as the start of everything Khmer. A kingdom said to be local, indigenous, born from the delta's mud and brilliance. But then came the DNA. ABEM40. That was the child's code. And inside his cells, something waited, something no one expected. Nearly half of his ancestry, traced straight to South India. Not a vague match. Not a statistical maybe. Clear links to Tamil-speaking groups: Irala, Malaw, Vellalar. This wasn't a wandering trader. This wasn't a monk passing through. This was bloodline. This was family. And suddenly, the clean lines of Cambodia's origin story began to blur. Because this child wasn't a visitor. His DNA was closer to modern Cambodians than to anyone else alive. Meaning this blend, this Indian-Khmer fusion, wasn't a glitch in the story. It was the story. So what kind of world does that point to? One where migration wasn't rare, it was royal. One where kingdoms weren't built in isolation, but through quiet unions, forgotten marriages, and shared blood across oceans. If the first great Khmer kingdom was part Indian from the start, what else have we misunderstood? And if this boy was only one piece of the puzzle, just one child in one grave, then the next question becomes hauntingly simple. How many others are still out there, waiting to speak? If one forgotten child could shift the roots of a kingdom, then what about the rulers? What if the very first kings of Cambodia, the founders of Funan, weren't born of one bloodline but two? Not purely Khmer, not entirely Indian, but something in between. We call Funan Cambodia's first kingdom, the spark that lit the empire to come. But the truth might be more tangled and more human, because now the question isn't just about one grave. It's about who wore the crown, and what their blood carried. Ancient texts speak of kings with foreign advisors, of Sanskrit inscriptions on Khmer land, of Indian customs practiced in Mekong courts. Historians called it influence. Traders passing through. Monks sharing stories. But the DNA doesn't whisper influence. It screams inheritance. What we see in that child, the 40 to 50% South Indian ancestry, isn't a one-time event. It hints at something bigger, a pattern, a foundation. Fire altars built in the shape of Tamil ritual sites, royal ceremonies blending Indian cosmology with Khmer language, temple bas-reliefs showing faces that feel familiar but not quite the same. This wasn't imitation. This was fusion, not just of culture, but of kin. So what kind of kingdom was Funan really? Was it led by Indo-Khmer families, bonded by marriage, strategy, and myth? Were its rulers descendants of two worlds, using bloodlines as diplomacy? And deeper still, how were they seen? Did the people worship them as sacred, chosen by gods from both lands? Or did whispers follow them, questions about loyalty, about purity, about origin? We may never know what the people of Funan said aloud, but the bodies speak, the bones remember. And for centuries, we didn't listen, because every genetic study before missed the signal, focused on modern DNA, skimmed the surface. So now the question becomes even more haunting. If this fusion began that early, why did the science take so long to find it? And that's what broke the silence. Not a war, not a revolution, but a child's genome, pulled from a grave no one expected to matter. But if this Indo-Khmer fusion started so early, why didn't anyone see it sooner? Why did every textbook, every paper, every trusted expert miss it? The truth. Science didn't ignore the story. It just couldn't reach it. For years, researchers searched ancient Southeast Asia for Indian signals in the past. But every time they tested the bones, there was nothing. No trace of Tamil ancestry. No southern Indian markers. Just silence, data gaps, and confusion. And so they made a conclusion that felt safe, but wrong. That maybe Indian migration had come later. That early Cambodia was untouched. That Funan, Angkor, and everything in between had local roots only. But there was a problem hiding in plain sight. Tropical heat, moisture, bacteria, time. Southeast Asia's soil destroys DNA like fire eats paper. The ancient remains here aren't like frozen Viking bones or Egyptian mummies. They decay faster, disappear easier, which meant for decades the region was invisible to ancient DNA research. But then, in 2022, something changed. A team of scientists, led by Paya Chongmai, decided to try again, this time with tools no one had before. Ultra-sensitive filters, error correction systems, damage mapping that could separate ancient signal from modern noise. And in the bones of that one child, they found the answer that had been missing for generations. The signal wasn't weak. It was strong, and it had been there all along. The science hadn't lied. It just hadn't been ready. But while the scientists were fine-tuning machines and checking damage rates, something else was happening. Outside the labs, outside the journals, people were already telling their own stories, inventing new identities, rewriting history in real time. And the next battle wouldn't be in a lab. It would be online. It didn't take long. Once the ancient DNA results went public, once that one child's Indo-Khmer ancestry shattered the silence, a different kind of noise began to rise. Not in labs, not in universities, but online. Within weeks, Facebook pages, YouTube videos, TikTok threads, all started spreading one message. Cambodia, they claimed, wasn't Khmer at all. According to them, modern Cambodians were descended from Indonesian settlers, or Thai migrants, or anyone really, as long as they weren't the original builders of Angkor. They called it the flawed Thai narrative, and it spread like wildfire. Fake DNA charts with doctored arrows, maps of imaginary migrations, voiceovers declaring that Khmer culture was imported, that Khmer history was borrowed. And for some, especially across the border in Thailand, these myths weren't just stories. They were weapons. By 2025, it wasn't just trolling. It was political. Cambodian forums filled with outrage. Thai influencers pushed edited clips of old colonial theories. Bots flooded comment sections with one repeating claim that the Khmer identity was a lie. The real-world impact? Tense. Border flare-ups. Misinformation flagged as a national threat. The Thai government stepping in, warning against fabricated history. And in the middle of all this, the bones sat silent, unmoved, unshaken, waiting. Because the truth from that child's grave didn't care about hashtags or hate campaigns. It had no side, no agenda, but it did raise a terrifying question. If data this precise, this ancient, could be twisted in real time, what chance did real history have? Because now, it wasn't just about genetics. It was about control. Control over the past. Control over identity. Control over whose bloodline gets to claim the land beneath their feet. But there's a deeper story here. One the internet forgot, but the bones still remember. But the bones remember more than just migration. They remember what came before. Because long before South Indian blood crossed the sea, before Funan, before the temples, before the kingdom had a name, there were already people here. And they weren't outsiders. They were Cambodia. Deep inside the mitochondrial DNA, passed down from mother to child for thousands of years, we find their echo. Haplogroups like B5A1, F1A1MR, old lineages, Austroasiatic, indigenous, the oldest threads in the Khmer tapestry. They lived in the highlands, the river bends, the forest edges, farming rice, weaving spirit into story, burying their dead in ways still remembered by the mountain tribes. And when the Indian ships came, when new gods and alphabets crossed the water, these people didn't vanish. They adapted, blended, breathed it in. That boy from Vat Komnou, the one with half his DNA from South India, the other half, it's from here, from this soil, from the old lines. He's not a symbol of replacement. He's a symbol of layering, of a people who absorbed something new and made it theirs. The temples weren't Indian. They were Khmer, built with Indian stone and Cambodian soul. So when the internet screams about invasion, or purity, or lost roots, the bones offer a softer truth. Admixture isn't erasure. It's memory, written in layers, not in lines. But if this mix was sacred once, if Indo-Khmer ancestry built the first state, then why did the memory vanish? Why did the Indian bloodline become something holy, only to be forgotten? So how did Indian blood, once sacred, then forgotten, first become royal? Maybe it didn't happen by chance. Maybe it was chosen. Because this wasn't just intermarriage. It was strategy. A kingdom carved not just from land, but from lineage. The myths of Funan tell of a foreign Brahmin, an Indian priest, arriving by sea, and a local queen who takes him not as a threat, but as a husband. That union doesn't end in scandal. It begins a dynasty. Sound familiar? It should. Rome married into Egypt. China allied through blood. Across history, power wasn't just conquered, it was married, inherited, engineered. And in Funan, that pattern may have started early. The temples don't just echo Indian shapes. They mirror Tamil cosmology. Temples laid out like yantras, like sacred maps. The kings took Indian titles. The inscriptions fused Khmer rhythm with Sanskrit precision. But underneath all that symbolism, there was a deeper logic. Indian blood brought something the local elite needed: access. Access to spiritual prestige, trade routes, legitimacy in the eyes of seafaring empires. It wasn't about losing identity. It was about upgrading it. To be Indo-Khmer wasn't a dilution. It was elevation, power encoded into ancestry. But if kingship began through fusion, not division, then how far did that logic spread? Was Funan the only kingdom built this way? Or was it just a first? Because once blood becomes policy, once marriage becomes empire, it doesn't stop with one generation. And it didn't stop with one kingdom. It didn't stop with one kingdom, because it wasn't just one kingdom. What began in Funan spread like tide water, across deltas and harbors, through wind, salt, and time. This wasn't a moment. It was a movement. Ancient South India, its coastlines dotted with ships, temples, and spice ports, looked east and saw more than trade. They saw mirrors. Every summer, the monsoon winds shifted, and with them came merchants, but also mothers, scribes, builders, lovers. They crossed the Bay of Bengal not just with goods, but with gods. Down into the Mekong Delta, across to the port of Oceo, its canals still sleeping beneath Cambodian rice fields. Further still to Khao Sam Kao in southern Thailand, where glass beads from India lie beside Chinese jade. These weren't random stops. They were nodes, anchors in a maritime web that stretched farther than empires dared to map. But only one site, one country, gave us proof in the blood: Cambodia. That child in Vat Komnou didn't arrive by accident. He was part of something designed, generational, strategic, a genetic Silk Road, where belief and biology moved together. The Indian DNA in him came before Buddhism, before Chinese monks wrote about the kingdom, before the world paid attention. And still, most maps don't show it, because this wasn't conquest. It wasn't war. It was quieter, deeper, written not in battle scars, but in chromosomes. But here's the real mystery. If this was the start, if Indian ancestry helped build the first kingdom, how far did it go? Where's that blood now? Not just in books or bones, but in living people? Because history may forget, but DNA doesn't. And the question is no longer where it came from. It's whether it's still here, still in us. So the question isn't where that blood came from. It's whether it's still with us. Centuries have passed. Kingdoms have risen, burned, rebuilt, and fallen. Cambodia has been conquered, colonized, bombed, and broken. And still, somehow, the code remains. The child from Vat Komnou, the one buried before the temples, before the wars, he didn't disappear. He endured, not in monuments, but in people. Modern Cambodians, especially among Khmer Cham and Khmer Lo families, still carry faint echoes of that South Indian ancestry. Not always obvious, not always loud, but it's there, whispering beneath the surface. You can't see it in skin tone. You won't hear it in accent. But if you follow the strands of DNA, they lead you back to that boy, back to that crossing, back to that quiet empire built not just by bloodshed, but by bloodlines. And maybe that's the most powerful legacy of all, because the child didn't build a temple. He didn't lead an army. He died young and left behind no words, but his bones told a story no archive ever did. That identity isn't fixed. That history isn't pure. That we are built of everything, the old, the foreign, the native, the lost. If DNA carries memory, what else do we carry without knowing? What ancient names echo in our laughter? What forgotten kingdoms live in the shape of our hands? Because this was never just about one boy, or one kingdom, or one test result. It's about all the other graves still sleeping. The thousands of bodies buried beneath Southeast Asia's soil, silent for now, but not forever. They're waiting, and through them, more names will rise. More secrets will speak. More ancestors, waiting to be heard again through DNA.